Hello everyone and welcome to our Bible study. We are in 2 Chronicles chapter 10 today. We are finally past the reign of King Solomon and we're on to his son Rehoboam. So we finally get to introduce some new material here, and our first page is going to change a little bit. If you would like the free PDF that comes with this study, you can download it on our website at tobelikechrist.com, as well as hundreds of other studies at this point. And we are trying to go through one chapter of the Bible every day. So if you're new here, that's what our goal is. Let's talk about when the events of 2 Chronicles chapter 10 happened. So Solomon was the king over Israel and Judah for 40 years. His reign ended in about 975 BC. We're going to talk about his son Rehoboam taking the throne in this chapter, and that would be 975 BC, and he reigns for a number of years moving forward. Key characters here, we need to talk about Rehoboam. He is, as I mentioned, the son of Solomon. He becomes the fourth king over the United Kingdom of Israel and Judah, but that is a very short reign over the United Kingdom because the kingdom is going to split. We'll talk about that in the next two chapters. Now, we also have the old advisors and the new advisors. When Rehoboam needed help advising the nation, he went and he sought counsel from two different groups of people: the wise old counselors who had served his father and his peers. We'll see which one he listens to and how that turns out in this chapter. And then Jeroboam. Jeroboam gets a little bit more attention in the account of these things in 1 Kings, but Jeroboam is briefly mentioned in chapter 10. He was an Ephraimite who was originally a servant of Solomon's, and God selected him to be the king over the portion of Israel, the portion of the nation that is going to rebel against Rehoboam and break off and make their own nation. That nation will become known as the nation of Israel, or the northern kingdom, but more on that later. In this chapter and on our map, we have Rehoboam becoming king in Shechem, but he's going to base his capital and his throne is going to be situated in Jerusalem, like the kings who came before him. Now, it's pretty difficult to overemphasize the importance of at least getting your head wrapped around the events that are going to be described in this chapter, namely the division of God's people. So from the time of Moses, basically, when he led the people out of Egypt and brought them to the promised land, and they fought for the promised land, and through the period of the judges and through the period of the first three kings, Saul and David and Solomon, all these people have been united. Well, for the most part. There were a couple instances where they weren't, but for the most part, they've been one nation, right? United under God, indivisible. I don't know about liberty and justice for all, but they've been united. This is going to mark basically a new phase in the history of God's people. They're going to split apart, and they're going to form two nations. Those two nations are going to have two different kings, and they're going to go in different directions. Their fates are going to be different, and this is going to continue on basically throughout the story of the rest of the Old Testament. And so do make a mental note of when this happens and what happens, because it's going to be key in the comprehension of the rest of this book and really the rest of the Old Testament. This chapter has 19 verses, all under one section heading, Judah and Israel split, the beginning of the divided kingdom, verses 1 through 19. The people of the nation gathered for the coronation of the new king, Rehoboam. They gathered in Shechem. Now, they had a request of their new king. Solomon, with all of his building projects, all of his ambitions, he had asked a lot of the people in terms of labor and taxes, etc. And the people wanted Rehoboam to lighten their load, to take some of the burden off of them. They brought this request to Rehoboam, and Rehoboam asked for 3 days to consider what he was going to do. The first thing Rehoboam did during those 3 days was he went and sought counsel from the old wise advisors who had served his father. And they counseled him to give the people what they were asking for. They said, if you let up on the people, if you relieve their burden, they will serve you and be faithful to you. But after this, Rehoboam went and he counseled with his peers, the younger people, younger men who he had grown up with, and they gave him the opposite advice. They said, no, don't let up on the people, threaten them that their lives could get even harder under your reign. And when the people returned to Rehoboam on the third day, Rehoboam heeded the advice of his peers, and he threatened the people, telling them that he would not ease their burden. And when the men of Israel, the men of the northern tribes, heard this response, They were so mad that they split the kingdom. They basically started a civil war, rejecting Rehoboam's reign over them and leaving him to govern only the tribe of Judah and some of the territory of the southern tribes. The men of Israel later stoned Rehoboam's taskmaster to death, and they renounced any loyalty to the house and to the line of David. Now, God already prophesied that this split was going to happen, and so he already has this laid out in his plans, but this is going to be the situation moving forward. We're going to have a kingdom in the north, known as the kingdom of Israel, and then a kingdom in the south, known as the kingdom of Judah, that takes on the name of Judah, which was the largest tribe in the south. So try to remember this chapter if you can, and remember what happens here. 2 Chronicles chapter 10 is quite important. You can get some more details, obviously, in the account in 1 Kings as well. Now let's go down to our application section. Rehoboam's mistake was that he positioned himself as a taskmaster, not as a leader. Great leaders do not overburden their people, and they look out for the best interest of those who are under them. There's no better example of this than Jesus. He burdened himself to care for his subordinates. We should replicate the same leadership style and the same pattern as we look to lead in our homes, in our jobs, and in the church.